Hello everyone, nice to be here finally. So my name is Björk and I work as a researcher at the Institute of Stress Medicine in Gothenburg together with Inga and Linda. Since 2004 we've been treating and studying patients at the Institute with burnout syndrome or exhaustion disorder if you prefer that term. And during this session I will tell you about an ongoing project where we will try to implement the knowledge that we have gained during these years in the primary care in Sweden. And during this section I will explain why I think it's important that the primary care actually involve the workplace when treating patients with stress-related disorders. And secondly, in the second section I will tell you about how I think that an intervention study should be designed in a social context. And actually, I would very much like you to interrupt me if anything is unclear or if you have any questions or even comments or different views than I do during the presentation. So please feel free to raise your hand and comment on what I'm saying. This picture is quite familiar to everyone in this room, I guess, by now, that we have a huge problem with the common mental disorders in Sweden, for the moment particularly among women. They are now the dominating reason for the ongoing sickness benefits. And the red area here is dominated mainly by two disorders or diagnoses. The reaction to severe stress and the depressive episode. So two diagnoses really dominate this red area here. And there should be no news to anyone in this room or in this country that the government and the authorities are now very, very concerned by the situation and really want to treat and prevent these disorders. The direct societal cost for the red area is about now annually estimated to be an annual 120 billion Swedish crowns. That is about 50% of the cost for education in Sweden. So this is a huge challenge for the society and of course for the individuals that suffer from these disorders, of course, mainly. So everyone is concerned by now how to treat and prevent this. And particularly how to get people who suffer from these disorders to get back to work. So the return to work field is really growing. However, since every country has their own system of how to divide the responsibility for rehabilitation between employers, the social insurance agencies, the occupational health services and the healthcare systems, it can be very tricky to learn from international studies and draw conclusion in a Swedish context. However, there have been some recent reports and reviews, and we mentioned some. This is one book from 2015, where they kind of conclude that after a review of the international literature, it's very, very clear that to prevent and treat common mental disorders, we must involve the employer and the workplace. And this is also supported in another literature review, which is part of this report from also 2015, where Irene Jensen makes the same conclusion. Everything points to the fact that the employer must be involved in rehabilitation. Also, Jensen and colleagues, they say that there is a lack of training, of routines and guidelines in the Swedish healthcare, specifically in the primary care, to do this. So we are facing a challenge here. Now, some of you might think, well, isn't this the very core of the occupational health services? Aren't they the ones that are supposed to deal with the employer and work together with the workplace? Well, unfortunately, we are in a situation in Sweden which is quite, I don't know if everyone is aware of it. That out of 4.7 million employees, Swedish employees, there are 3.1 million employees that are offered occupational health services. But according to their own industry association, Sveriges Företagshälsor, there's only 1 million, about 1/3 of these, that are actually receiving good, high-quality occupational health service. And that is to say that occupational health services that can deal with both the individual and the workplace. So why should primary care deal with the workplace? Well, because there is nowhere else to turn to. Some of the employees do have a good, of course, do have good occupational health services, but far from everyone in Sweden has that. So the conclusion of this is that, yes, the primary care must be better prepared to deal with the workplace. Well, that is my conclusion anyways. Does anyone disagree with this, maybe? Not from down there. We can have that discussion in the pause, because that's kind of controversial to say that. So in last year we received funding from Forte, the Research Council Forte, in order to hang on a bit, to develop and evaluate the model, as I said, which where we take the experience that we have from treating and studying the patients at the institute and make a model that is well adapted to the primary care setting. So the main challenge for us this year has been to make a well-adopted model. As you might know, it is notoriously difficult to change clinical practice in the primary care setting. And early on in the project, we really realized that we have to do this in a way that makes life easier for physicians and not more complicated. For example, at the Institute, our physicians have had a great opportunity to meet their patients for a long period of time and for long sessions. So they have really got a view and an understanding of each patient's life and work situation, something which is impossible when you meet the patient for 20 minutes in the primary care setting. So we needed to find other ways, other professions that could collect information that is needed in order to do a good treatment. Luckily for us, since 2006, there has been a new profession that has been introduced in the primary care called the rehabilitation coordinator. Does anyone know about this? Have you heard the word before? Or no?
Yes.
Yeah, some of you. So what is a rehabilitation coordinator? Well, you can describe it by pointing out the three main tasks they have. They are supposed to provide support to the patient during the rehabilitation process. They are supposed to provide internal support and coordinate other professions within their units, and to be advise their colleagues in sickness insurance medicine, försäkringsmedicin, to be an expert in försäkringsmedicin. And also to be responsible for the external cooperation with, for example, employers and the social insurance agency and so on. And some recent evaluations of this new function within the primary care point to that normally both patients and physicians are very pleased with this function as long as they are provided with the opportunities to do a good job. So this is kind of hopeful. And we've decided to use the coordinator in this intervention to collect information that the physicians don't have time to collect themselves, and also to be the contact with them, and to run the contact with the employer. The intervention consists of three components. first one is a one-day training of physicians and coordinators in order to provide them with information about how the workplace influence this kind of diagnosis and syndromes. And to give them knowledge enough for them to feel that it's really important to involve the employer in the rehabilitation. And the second ingredient of this intervention is a working method, like a systematic work method, which focuses on the collaboration between the physician and the coordinator, and also on the involvement of the employer. And finally, we will open some kind of support line where the participants, all the physicians and the coordinators, can have a helpline to the Institute of Stress Medicines where our experienced doctors can answer their questions during the intervention. Well, the point of this intervention is, of course, to evaluate whether there is a difference between the intervention units and a group of control units in the return to work among 500 patients in total that we will include in the study. And that there will be 30 primary care centers involved in the study, 15 controls and 15 cases. When designing this study, I was very much inspired by this book. Have anyone read it? Oh, exciting. It's written by Ray Pawson and Nick Tilley in 1997. And one core argument in this book is that this experimentalist ideal that we have to cancel out all differences between cases and controls, except for the magical pill, which is the intervention, is just not possible in a social setting. Sug på den. Pawson and Tilley even argue that it's completely absurd to try to write out everything that is really essential to an intervention, namely the social conditions that are favorable to its success. They claim that each researcher that is running an intervention must be very specific from the beginning on how the intervention is supposed to work, for whom it's supposed to work, and under which circumstances, both at the individual level and at an organizational level. An intervention never works for everyone, not in a social context. In our field, we are not dealing with so natural laws. Do Pawson and Tilley have a point here? Well, I apparently think they do, but taking a short view on this quite famous library and some review studies here, like randomly selected, this is very commonly what we see. That there is some evidence then that X will work for some people with some disorders. There is insufficient evidence to support or not to support something. There is inconsistency in the findings, but there is still some evidence that it might work for some people. But the problem is that the conclusion that the scientific community makes of this is normally this. The findings are inconsistent and more randomized controlled trials are needed. So more of the same thing. They say that, well, they're telling us that if we only keep faith with experimentalist design and approach, eventually we will have outcome patterns appearing and we will have predictive ability. But instead, maybe all of these studies included in these reviews have something really important to tell us. If you open up for the idea that not every intervention, not and any intervention won't have any like magical pill that would fix everything for everyone under any condition. Instead, we need to be specific about this. So back to the study. Where am I here? Oh. So the two main research questions we do have here is, of course, as I told you before, that the evident question: do patients within the intervention group return to work sooner than patients in the control group, of course. But besides that, we will also try to explain what mechanisms we are involved here, what groups of patients that are helped with this intervention, or not helped for that matter, because non-effects are of course as interesting as effects. Hey, we are a team of experienced doctors and researchers designing something that we really think will have an effect on patients. Oh, it didn't. That is very interesting. Also, however, in order to get some publications out of the project, we have actually designed it as a randomized controlled trial. But we also have some methods that will provide us with deeper information about each unit in the intervention group, and also about groups of patients in the intervention group. So we will try to use belt and braces and make something good out of this. And we will do focus group interviews, like before and after intervention. We will collect information about the area where the units are located. We will collect information about each unit's work environment and staff composition and stuff like that, in order to have some variety within the intervention group. To answer the question, why did this work, for whom, and under what circumstances? And finally, to say something about the ultimate output, which is of course the return to work measure. We will measure it 6, 12, and 18 months after sick listing. So this is the working group. Some of you are actually here in the room, Anders and Annika is a reference person, Björk. And as you can see, there is a mix of researchers and practitioners, and also from various disciplines. And the intervention, this one-day training, the first part of the intervention starts in November. And so far we have, as I said, 30 units included in the study. So, thank you very much for your attention, and really, I would be really, really glad to have your comments on this during these 2 days that we have ahead of us. So, thanks, and see you.